Well, is this on? Yeah, can you hear me? Thank you very much. My last name, well, my first name is pretty hard to pronounce for most people. They say Vasilis, Vasilius, Vasilis, anything. So I actually respond to anything. My last name is really hard for everybody who's not Dutch. So it's Van Gemert if you really want to know. Well, thank you very, very much for having me here. Very much looking forward to Saturday to actually visit your city of Zurich. But in the meantime, I'll talk to you about creating stuff for the web. I really, really, really like creating stuff for the web because the web is a wonderful medium. I also like creating physical stuff, and I'll explain to you why the web is better. A few years ago, Smashing Magazine published this beautiful book, and in this beautiful book there were these beautiful illustrations by Mike Kuss, and I really liked this one especially, and my wife liked it as well, and we had this very boring wall in our house, and we decided to paint this illustration onto our wall. Now, this is a lot of work, but it can be done, and after a while it looked like this. And now I see some designers here cringing and say, what? Ah, that's off the grid. And indeed, it's off the grid. But it took me, I painted this whole thing onto the wall, and then I noticed that it was not on the grid. It's too big. It should be like this, right? In real life, and this really happened, this is a lot of work. Because then I have to open Illustrator, find that file that I made the stencils with, make it a bit smaller, send it over to my laser cutter who lives on the other part of town, other end of town, ask my kid to please get off my car so I can drive to this laser cutter, pick up the stencils, and then paint every single circle back onto the wall. This is a lot of work. It took me about a month. And now it's there, it's beautiful, and I enjoy it every day. But this was really, really, really a lot of work. Now, to thank Mr. Kuss for this beautiful illustration, I didn't ask his permission to paint it on my wall, I just did it. I thought, okay, I should thank him in one way or another. So I recreated his illustration with web technology, with HTML and CSS. And here we have it, a website with circles. Now, I could say that these circles are too big. Well, they're not really, but okay, let's just assume that they're too big. On the web, it's actually not that much work to fix this issue. As you can see here, I specified the font size in M's, and all I need to do to fix this problem is make the font size a little bit smaller, and there you have it. I mean, I think this is just fantastic about the web, that we can fix these things by simply changing the font size. The web is super, super flexible. And it's the most I don't think anything else is as flexible as the web. I think that's fantastic. And the reason why we can do this is because of one of the principles that the web is based on. And this is just the principle, this is for everyone. This is what was in mind when Mr. Tim Berners-Lee came up with the idea of the web, that it should work for everybody. It doesn't really matter what kind of hardware you use, what kind of software you use. It doesn't really matter if you can see or if you cannot see, or if you can hear or if you cannot hear. It should just work. And this is fantastic. This is actually the first medium and the only medium I know of that can actually do this. We can create stuff that works for everybody. Now, this also means that this illustration of circles would have to work in browsers that, for instance, don't support border radius. They do exist. What should it look like? Should it look like this? Well, to be honest, I don't think it should look like this. Most of the time, I don't care if border radius doesn't work. You just see non-rounded corners. Doesn't really matter. But in this case, where the illustration is about circles, it should be circles, right? Or somehow better than this. So I decided that if you have Opera Mini, for instance, instead of seeing this illustration, you see this website. So you see the colors, but it just describes what you see. Now, if you're a very creative Opera Mini user, thank you. You might even see a better illustration than the one I showed you before. This could be amazing. I would have to repaint that one onto the wall. And if you're an IE8 user, you're really lucky because you can imagine the colors. Because IE8 doesn't support HSL color notation. Okay, so this is fantastic. I really, really like this. I think this is why we should all be very, very proud that we are allowed to work for the web. It is the best medium out there. It's the best thing ever. We can create this stuff. This works for blind people as well. This can be read, right? They can hear the illustration. Okay, so another thing that fascinates me about the web is not really the fact that students can nowadays afford somehow very expensive computers. What really fascinates me is these things on the wall. These are the common screen sizes, or mirrors in the size of common screen sizes back in 2011 or 2012. I don't remember. An artwork by Raphael Roosendaal. If we would make this artwork nowadays, we would need probably the whole university, all the walls on the university to cover with mirrors of all the different screen sizes out there. And this gives us sort of a problem, right? It's not easy to solve because every medium so far used to be fixed. We had paper and we could just fit enough letters on there and make sure that it's readable. That's actually pretty easy. And now we have to make these layouts that just fit on everything. I found it pretty hard, but I found it really, really fascinating. Of course, the way to do that is when you make this illustration smaller, you can simply realign the circles, make a breakpoint, use media queries, and you're done. Another breakpoint, more media queries, and do this. It works, but it's a lot of work. I think there are better ways to do this. So the way that I created this illustration is by using position absolute. So I had to absolutely position every circle onto a certain position of the grid. It's a lot of work. It's really not nice. And then I made this breakpoint and I had to do that all over again. And I got bored while I was creating this animation, so I stopped halfway, right? Because this is really, really too much work. You shouldn't be doing that. This is not a system. Hayden Pickering did this brilliant talk about systems, about grid systems. And in it he says, CSS grid systems, well, he said this, that they are prescriptions. And that systems should solve problems for us. We shouldn't be telling systems what to do. Systems should just do it, right? We have all these robots, we have all these computers. Let them do the work and let us do the relaxing, right? Not the other way around. So he said this very smart thing. We'll get, you should follow Hayden Pickering. He says many, many smart things. Okay, so a system. So instead of defining every single breakpoint and then realigning everything manually, we could do a much better job. And we've had this technology for, I think, CSS. The first idea of CSS had probably float in it somewhere. There you have it. Floating. It's amazing, isn't it? It just goes to the next line and it just simply works. This is really easy and it's very old technology, nothing new, I'm sorry about that, but we can do responsive design without media queries and with just looking at these things. But Vasilis, some of you are thinking, I'm sure about that. Our websites don't look like circles. We have other stuff on our websites. People actually use them. They just don't look at them. There's information on it. Okay, you might make, for instance, weblogs every now and then. I make many blogs, and a homepage of a blog is usually a list of articles, one above the other. Now, we can use float here, so when it's wider, it just adapts itself. We don't need any media queries to fix it. It just works. Except that's not really true. I didn't use float here, I used display inline block, because when I use float, it looks like this. Which, you are all Swiss designers, I think you should love this, because this is active white space, right? That's what the Swiss taught us. So this is a happy accident, like a famous painter used to call this. We can use float to even make the web more chaotic for us. But beautiful chaos like this, right? So we can make white space, we can let float decide when to make active white space and let the content breathe. There is a problem with this, though. It looks beautiful, looks really beautiful, but it looks beautiful from people from Switzerland. As you might know, the web was for parts invented in Switzerland. But as I told you before, the web was invented for everybody. So not just Swiss people should enjoy these kind of layouts, it's also Italian people who should enjoy it. So we can do things like this nowadays. And I really urge you to look into the beautiful mix blend modes that we have and that we can use today, because I really like this stuff. And not enough people are actually using it nowadays, and we should, because I'm doing experiments with it, and these are the results, and I'm certain that you can do better experiments with it and make really beautiful stuff. But mixed blend mode, I think you should start using it. Anyway, did you know that if things don't float right, that you can simply do this? Overflow auto. I didn't know that, just learned that a few years ago. I think that's fantastic, as a side note. Okay, next technology, CSS columns. Beautiful technology. And when I looked at the website of this conference, I was really happy to see CSS columns in use. You don't see them that often. I don't know why, but they're not used that often. And here you see beautiful columns, a beautiful Swiss grid of 3 columns. And then when it gets smaller, you have a beautiful Swiss grid of 2 columns, perfectly aligned. Now, this is really good. There are 2 ways to do this. So the first way to do this is to say, okay, when the screen gets wider than 48 display all the list items in 2 columns. And when it gets wider than 61.3125 this is real code. So I copied this, I didn't make this up. Use 3 columns. This is a lot of work. So what happens when the screen gets wider? Should we add another media query? There's a shorthand which does exactly the same thing. And it's just columns 15M. Do not make columns smaller than 15M. That's what this says. And the result is exactly the same as what we saw here. So it will work just like that. Really easy code, very easy to implement, and the system will do the work for us. The computer will do the work, and we can buy a hammock and do nothing. Look at the ceiling or something like that. More useful stuff we can do. So you heard me talk about laziness, right? I am a lazy person. I'm sure many of you are lazy people as well. Developers should be lazy. Designers should be lazy as well. We tend to forget that. So I worked 15 years ago as a runner for movies. That's the person who wakes up earliest and gets home the latest because he has to pick up everybody and has to bring home everybody, and then he can go home. 16 hours of work every day for 7 days a week. And the weird thing is that when you're in such a community where everybody works that hard, people start to like it. Oh, I worked so hard for 3 months, no holiday, no weekend whatsoever. Whoa, really? Oh, I just did 2.5 months. People start talking like that, and they're really proud of hard work. So I had a break, a few days, flew to Greece, went to see my uncle, who is one of the most creative people in the world, fantastic guy. And I told him, listen to me, uncle, I work for 18 hours a day, and it's fantastic. And he said, what? What did I tell you all these years? You should let other people do the work. You're doing it wrong. This is not good. Okay, so now you know where it comes from, my laziness. It's my uncle. So where were we? We were with CSS columns. CSS columns is very good for long lists. So I showed you a small list. This is a very long list. This is the homepage of my photo site. And when it gets wider, it fixes it. I don't want to do this by hand. That would be silly, right? It just fixes it and it gets wider and wider. I don't have a screen this big. There's no way I can have this. But it just works. And I know on even a bigger screen, it will work as well. Another really nice thing about multi-column layout is usually when you add a new picture, the pictures will go like this, right? That's the normal order, so they'll flow the next one. But the nice thing about adding pictures this way is that older pictures from below will come up every now and then. So it adds to the chaos, it adds to the serendipity, and you can just reinvent stuff. It's really nice. I really enjoy multi-column layout for images. I'll just show another example. 1.5 years ago, I started with the same idea of letting the computer do the work. I started this art project with every day it generates a few works of art for me. It generates 10 books with all different illustrations, random colored illustrations, and it generates about 10 to 15 images, all random colored illustrations. I started doing that because I didn't understand color at all. I mean, I know all these people and they say, oh, that's beautiful, the blue on the green. And I would say, why? I don't get it. So I started this experiment as a slow way of teaching myself color. I would just look at all these colors every day, and then suddenly I started understanding a little bit. I still don't get it, but it doesn't really matter. Now, people can look at these things, but people can also download these books, or they can even buy them if they really want to. Nobody ever did that, of course. I did, I buy them as presents, but this also works good. But this, as you can understand, this has been going on for 1.5 years now. This is a terribly, 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 terribly long list of items, and it's ever growing. And I think for this, multi-column is just perfect. You can just use this for really long lists for people to get to their place quickly. And it solves the problem. I don't have to write media queries for this. It just works. The system will solve it. But Vasilis, you say, we have other stuff to make, right? How about articles? The web is not just long lists. Well, that's true. Articles don't work, right? You can come to the bottom of a long article and then you have to scroll back up to the top and go on reading. It just doesn't work like that. That's why we never see multi-column layouts for articles. Or, well, we don't see it that often because this won't work, but this might work, right? Somehow, I'm not sure, but it could work. And this is actually pretty easy to do. There's not much code needed. It's not a complex JavaScript library that you need in order to get this fantastic right scrolling effect. No, it's just this. 20 columns and a height of 100% of the viewport, and you get the effect for free. Really easy. There is a big problem with this code, though, and that is once you read these 3 columns and you come here, they are harder to ignore, dot. There's no way you know that there's a lot of content over there. It just doesn't show up. So we can invent complex new user interface items and put them in there and tell you that you can scroll visually somehow. Or we could do this. Cut off the last column, right? Make sure that, hey, there's something over there. if it's interesting, you have to scroll. Really easy, it's not that hard. This can be done as well with CSS, of course. So how do columns work? For instance, say the article is 70 M wide, and I told my computer that the column should not be smaller than 20 M. It will just try to fit as many columns as possible into 70 M. And it'll try 4. And it will count, and then it'll say, oh, that's less than 20 M. That's not good. My human told me it should be more than 20 M. Let's fix that. So it'll just keep counting until it finds the right number, right? Until it fits. So here you have 3 columns. Now, how do we make sure that it will never fit, that we will always see a cutoff column? That's pretty, because, right, we don't see that going on. We simply resize the article. We make it 75% of the width of the content, and then it will simply repeat the width that it has of all the columns. And the reason why this works is because CSS is awesome. It's true. CSS has this weird thing that every designer who starts with CSS says, what the fuck is this? I told it should be 75 M, and it just ignores it. Yes, indeed. There is a thing called overflow, and it's on auto. That's fantastic. That's just really, really beautiful. That's another reason why the web is better than everything else. We don't have this on my wall. And before you say, but Vasilis, nobody will ever use this, there is actually this very interesting startup in the Netherlands, Blendel they're called, and they publish newspaper articles and magazine articles from existing magazines, existing newspapers in the Netherlands, and you can buy them. So you can pay, let's say, 80 cents, and then you can read the article. And what they did is they used a multi-column layout so that it looks a bit more like a real magazine, like a paper magazine. It gets this paper magazine feel to it. So, yes, you can certainly use it. There is this very interesting spec about paged media, where they can use multi-column, and instead of scrolling, you can page through the different pages, but unfortunately, no browser is really interested in it, so it's not implemented anywhere, so I'm not going to dive deep into this. I'm not going to dive into it at all. So we had these 2 old ways of changing layout, and that was based on changing the screen size. So when you change the screen size, the layout changes by itself. It's a system. There's other ways to change the layout, and one of them is abusing the target selector. So by user input, we can change the layout. So this is one of these websites with an endless lists of colored rectangles on colored backgrounds. It goes on forever. And it's always one rectangle is as high and as wide as the viewport. This is a nice layout. I really like it because you just get no distraction from anything else. But I can imagine that somehow I want to look at it like this, right? Columns next to each other. The Swiss would love this. Columns next to each other in a good rigid grid, and then we can compare stuff. So how could we do this? I could, of course, write a JavaScript, change a class name somewhere, and then add some extra CSS to style this differently. But I thought about this one. We can target items in your content, right? This is simple technology, has been working for ages. We use it for skip links, to skip to somewhere else in the content. But you can also style that. And you can also style the HTML element. I didn't know that. I just start playing with it and it works. So now I can say, if I target the HTML element, just display the body content in columns of not more than 15, or not less than 15 M. Really easy to do. And then you have this, and it's beautiful. But this too goes on forever because there's so many rectangles there. So maybe we want a different layout, like this. This is fantastic. This is all the rectangles so far. And it will go on until all of them are shown as pixels. So this fits, beautiful, some Flexbox magic I used here. I'll show you later on how to do this. I can use another ID, of course, and I could put that ID on the body, of course. And now I can say, when the body is targeted, I want this Flexbox magic to happen, and ta-da, there we have it. Now, you might have noticed that below these rectangles, there's actually a description of the rectangle. I wrote a little script that translates color into human readable text. So it says, an unsaturated, very dark indigo rectangle of average width and rather high on a rather saturated dark red background. Well, it doesn't say red, but I don't know how to pronounce cyan background. Okay, so I wrote this script. It does that for me. I can imagine that some of the minimalists among you, and there should be many of you here, actually are pretty frightened by this website. All these colors, all these different sizes, it's awful. But this textual representation, that's actually pretty neat, right? Wouldn't it be good if we only saw this? Well, how can we do this with the target selector without adding an extra wrapper, right? We use the HTML element for an ID, and we use the body for an ID. What can we abuse now? Anybody? The head. You can target the head element. I didn't know that. That's fantastic, isn't it? HTML is just beautiful. Wow. We can do this stuff. So now we can say, don't display SVGs that are inside a body next to a targeted head. Fantastic. And then it looks like this. Isn't that beautiful? Just the text, no color. Okay, so let's get on to Flexbox. Flexbox is wonderful. And anybody not using Flexbox? Oh, just a few. Okay, that's good. We can skip this part then. Flexbox. So I created this website. This is my homepage. I guess some of you might create just styled lists of links every now and then. I used mix blend mode, as you can see, and you should all start using mix blend mode as well. And it's just a list of links. Now, the way this is done is really easy. Just display flex, use flex wrap, solve this problem of when things should break for me. Do this, computer. Don't bother me with this. Then tell the things, everything inside that element to just grow equally. And I set the font size to 1.5 M. And it looks like this. And now when I make the screen smaller, it's not really what I want to happen. It works and it reflows and it solves the problem for me, but it creates another problem, and that is that right here, some content is cut off, and I don't think that's necessary. It would be nice if everything always fit within the viewport, whatever the viewport is. Now, would that be possible? All right, here it's really, really not good anymore. So I said, instead of using M as a font size, I might try using the viewport width as a font size. And let's see what happens here. Now, this is actually really, really interesting what happens here. Because when you make it smaller, it just scales. And that reminded me of something. And this is really fantastic. For the first time, since we have CSS, we can actually emulate the way that images resize with pure CSS. Isn't that fantastic? We can just emulate images with CSS. So this is actually not what you want. You should never use viewport width units on your text elements because it will get too small. Definitely when you want people to read your text on small screens, this will break. So I saw this clever tweet by Vitaly where he asked, does anybody use this? So he said, let's add a calc function, and then we have 2M, and then 2VH plus 2VW and see what happens. What this should do is that it is something like a minimum font size. It will never get smaller than 2M. So it will never get too small. That's actually what you're doing here, which is very clever technique. So it will scale, and it will scale proportionally to the viewport, but never too small. And then this brilliant, brilliant young designer, Crocodillan, he answered, and he said, no, I never use that, but I do use this. And what does this do? I saw this, I don't know. Wow, what would you use it? And he showed this link, and he added this code pen, and it always fits. Doesn't really matter what you do, how big your screen is or what ratio it has, it will always fit. The text will always fit in there. And this is really interesting. This is exactly what I wanted, right? So instead of using VW or using media queries, I could use this terribly complex function instead and just fix it. And now my website looks like this, and it always fits. So everything is always inside the viewport. I really like that. This is one single line of CSS. And it even works on extreme, weird viewports that nobody will ever have, I hope. But it works. It's not 100%. There is, at the end of this presentation, there are some links to some sources. You can read the theory behind this. I'm not going to try to explain because I don't get it. But you could read it and maybe you will get it and find out better stuff, why this works, and find out even greater stuff with this. Because this is really stuff that we need to play this with. Calc functions with viewport units, that's just fantastic. And this animation is fantastic as well. I could leave this on here, go on forever. Just let it loop. But Vasilis, you say, our websites don't look like colored rectangles. Well, maybe they should. Maybe they should look like colored rectangles. Because right now, all websites look like this. A big image of any company or anything, whatever. Some letters, white letters on it. Doesn't really matter what it says. All these websites look the same. Fuck it. Use colors, right? Random colors. Make other stuff. We have the technology. We can do it. So now the last part of this talk, quantity selectors. That's actually what Hayden Pickering wrote a beautiful article about. You should read it. It's really good. It's really clever. And he explains it better than I will, but I'll try. I created another work of art. That was this one with 360 colored squares next to each other, and they fill the viewport. And every color is just one degree on the color circle, right? The next degree on the color circle. So you get this beautiful gradient. Now, I like this, but I wondered, what does it look like when it animates? So, oh, no. First, I have to show you how you make this. It's just really easy. Display flex, flex wrap. At the body, you have to set it to 100% viewport height. And then the article, you tell every item to grow the same way as any other article, and you tell them to shrink in the same way, and then you set the flex basis. I had a bit of a problem understanding flex basis. What does that mean? What is it? And I think there's an older spec in which they say it's not flex basis, but they call it preferred size or something like that. Preferred dimension. So I would prefer it to be 5% of the width or the height, whichever is bigger in this case. And that results in this beautiful animation, which could go on forever as well. I can just get into an endless loop when I look at this. And the interesting thing is that it changes the layout, and it will actually always try to just make it look nice, make it look a little bit balanced. Doesn't really work 100%, but it looks okay. And when we animate this, it looks like this. So I said, okay, I want every, this is actually a very slow animation. Every 20 seconds, a new rectangle is added. So it goes on for 2 hours. And I like that. I like small animations, slow animations. And we always talk about speed, 60 frames per second. Well, take it easy. I'll just take a look at it every now and then and see if it looks good. Don't have to hurry, right? Sit in your hammock, look at it every now and then. What? Still works. Good. Good. But I was not really, really happy with it. It looks good once it starts to fill up, right? But let's say from now on, these things are getting too thin and too high. It's not really beautiful. Well, we can argue about that. It looks okay, but especially when you add another one right here, this layout is really broken. This is not in balance. Well, not in my book. I don't know about you Swiss, but this is not according to Dutch design rules. So I said, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could fix this? If we could do something like this, that if we add another one, and if we add a fourth, that now suddenly the layout switches to this layout. And if we add another one and another one and another one and an eighth one, then we have a different layout. We couldn't use media queries for this, of course, because media query is not triggered here anywhere because the screen size doesn't really change. It's only the content that changes. So could we just tell the content, fix it for us, don't bother me? Well, it turns out no. The content cannot fix this automatically. We have to tell it what to do a little bit. It's a bit like media queries. And, well, this can go for on. I really like these animations. I could just loop these. This is the code. Now, I could explain this, but that would take a while. What it says is, if there are at least 4 items, use this CSS. And then when there are at least 8 items, use this CSS, and when there are at least 20 items, this is really, really clever. These are some people who really understood CSS selectors. And these are really intelligent people who came up with this. Leah Veroux, I think she wrote the first article starting this idea, and Hayden Pickering wrote about it. This is a link to the article by Hayden Pickering on a list apart. You should really read it because you should use this. This is fantastic. And right, and it also works because we use this Vmax as a unit. It will change the layout if we change the screen orientation. It will do that for us. We don't need to add media queries for us. That's a beautiful thing of using Vmax as a unit for your layout. It's really nice. You should do that. Okay, but Vasilis, you are saying, and I hear you, our websites don't look like animated colored rectangles. And that's true. Most of your websites certainly don't. While they should, they don't. So let's see if we can make a useful example. So here we have all the speakers and all the hosts of this wonderful conference with, of course, I added a little bit of mixed blend mode to spice it up a little bit. Now, what we could do, we could, of course, filter out the non-speakers. And then the layout will simply just change a little bit. Not that much, only here at the bottom something happens. But what if we just select only the hosts? Ta-da! This is just these quantity selectors I used, and it will just fill it up until it fits. I think that's really wonderful. There was no way we could do this, or we had to use, I don't know, JavaScript probably, something else. The female, oh, this is just terrible, isn't it? Just 4 female speakers? Well, that's not enough. I was at the, what was it called? Responsive Day Out in Brighton a few months ago, and more than half of the speakers there were women. Now, this gave me the impression that there's a very active developer scene, women developer scene, in the United Kingdom. I'm not sure if that's true, but that's good. It doesn't really matter for me, but I'm a teacher. I'm a lecturer at university. Half of my students are women. But almost no students, women students of mine, turn out to be front-end developers, which is a pity because they're actually pretty good at it. And they actually look at it maybe in a different way, but we let all this talent go wasted because there are not enough role models. So, let's go on. These are all the people that are called Eric on this conference. And the layout changes as well. And we can go on. These are all the people that are male. These are all the people that speak on today. These are all the people that speak tomorrow. You had a chance to see these. If you didn't, tough luck. They spoke already. These are the people that speak right now. On two-track conference, I always have the impression that I should be at the other one, right? It's probably better. So you can make that function and the layout just simply changes. And these are all the people that come after this talk. So I really hope you will enjoy the rest of the talks of this conference. And thank you very much for listening to me. These are the sources. These are the slides. You can click on those. And please let me know if you find out anything beautiful with these techniques. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. You know, it's been 3 or 4 years since I've really done any production front end stuff after doing nearly 15 years worth, and this alone gets me excited to kind of dig in again.
Fantastic.
Which is saying a lot for me. I don't
Really?
care about the rest of you, really. I'm sure we have to have some questions, especially one that starts, "But Vasilis!" Anyone? Anyone? Yes. What about supporting old browsers with all this fancy CSS?
Good question. It actually depends on the definition of support. If support... It's true. Right? So you can say support is yes or no, or you could say support is a gradient, as I showed with the website of the circles, right? There's many ways to display content. And it doesn't really matter if, not everybody will see the mixed blend mode, right? So maybe people with IE are really lucky that they don't get to see my website as I intended to be. So, I know, this is too easy of an answer. I used to work at an agency, and this was actually a really hard question to answer. And especially clients, they were really hard to convince about this. But I really think if you show clients examples of how it could look, of progressive enhancement, or of how you could degrade these stuff beautifully, then it could work, right? Is that good enough? One for old browser, yeah, you could do that. You can always define some sort of a fallback. If Flexbox is not supported, you can do it with Float, right? Float is similar to Flexbox. I don't have a real answer to that. I mean, that's hard. It depends on the situation, depends on the context. But.
It depends.
Yeah.
I think that's a valid answer, and in so many different situations. Next question. We're going into the coffee break, so we have time for maybe 2 more, or 3, or none.
Or none.
Boy, you guys are boring. There you go. There's one back there.
Yeah.
So the question is, were the books your uncle's idea?
No, they were not. No, my uncle, he doesn't know how to turn on a computer. No. So that was definitely not his idea, no. Yeah, you can buy them. I sold them to myself, many. I sold a few to my mother. A friend of mine bought one. And now, last week, one person bought a book, a person I don't know. So, yes. There's a
hand up over here. Was it Vitaly?
Okay. That was not
I'm not even going to try and repeat that. I'm just going to let you ask it in a form of a question this time.
So this was kind of just a remark that the reason why we actually can avoid media queries altogether with Flexbox is because we're using a combination of flex wrap, which allows for wrapping, with flex basis, which is in many cases minimum size of an element before any additional size, any additional space that we have has been distributed. So this is why flex basis works like min width. That's a question.
Very hard question to answer. Yeah. It's true. Yes, that's why you should all use Flexbox until we have grids. And grid layout, I did a few experiments with CSS grids, which is not really implemented yet. Well, it's behind flags and you can experiment with it. You should experiment with it. It's nice. It's not that flexible though. It is, as you Swiss know, a grid. And a grid is predefined and it will work this way. So you will need media queries, but it really works nicely. I really like working with it. There is something in the spec which is very hopeful, but not implemented yet, which says flexible grid something, which is really what we need, right? Just fix it for us. That's probably what it means. But it's not there yet.
One more question. Make it a good one. Make it count. Seriously? I think they're just all impressed.
Really. I told everything. Thank you very much for it.
Thank you again, Vasilis.